Juliet didn't expect her day to shift in a single breath. Yet there she stood in the quiet corridor of Moneta Memorial Hospital, her pulse pounding loud enough to drown out everything else. The nurse she trusted, Mariam, stepped close with a calm face that didn't match the urgency in her eyes. Without warning, Mariam slipped a folded note into Juliet's palm and whispered, with a voice tight enough to raise alarms in anyone's chest, "Read it alone. Don't react. Someone is watching." For a moment, Juliet froze. She felt the tile floor steady beneath her feet, but nothing inside her felt steady at all. Not with a message passed in secret. Not with a nurse's warning delivered so sharply that her breath caught mid-inhale, and not with her billionaire husband lying in a hospital room just steps away, unaware that something far more complicated was unfolding beyond his door. The note felt heavier than paper should. It felt like a shift, the kind that rewrites everything you thought you knew. Have you ever experienced a moment like that? A moment where life appeared normal on the surface, calm, routine, predictable, until a single detail threw your entire understanding into question. One message, one sentence, one unexplained action that made you rethink the person you trusted most. Have you ever loved someone so completely that the possibility of them hiding something sent a tightening through your chest you couldn't ignore? Because that was Juliet now. Her husband Kingsley, respected, admired, adored, was in a hospital bed with a fractured arm he claimed came from a simple slip while cooking breakfast. But the nurse's warning suggested the story didn't add up. Something in his timeline was off. And if Mariam was this cautious, Juliet knew she wasn't imagining things. Someone wasn't telling the truth. And worse, someone nearby seemed to know that the truth was dangerously close to coming out. What Juliet discovers after this moment will take her far beyond a misplaced detail or a misremembered event. The timeline she checks will open a door to secrets she never expected to face. And when she and Kingsley return home, the person who reappears in the shadows isn't a stranger, but someone Juliet believed she could trust. Before we begin this journey, before you step fully into Juliet's reality and uncover what that note truly meant, welcome to Mr. Michael Stories Hub, where America's greatest stories and life lessons meet creativity and heart. If you're new to the family, we're grateful to have you here. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring more unforgettable stories your way. Juliet stood frozen for a moment after Mariam walked away, the note still warm from her hand. The hallway felt quieter now, almost too quiet, like the world expected her reaction, the one she wasn't allowed to have. She breathed slowly, steadying herself, forcing her face into calmness before she stepped back into Kingsley's room. He looked up the second she entered, eyes soft, relieved. He had no idea what Mariam had done, or why Juliet's heartbeat hadn't returned to normal. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. Juliet smiled, or at least created something that resembled a smile. "Yes, everything's fine." But inside, nothing was fine. Not the timing, not the silence, not the heavy note she kept tucked out of sight. and certainly not the uneasy glance Miriam had given her. A look that said, "This is bigger than you think." Juliet sat beside Kingsley's bed, listening to him explain again how the skillet slipped from his hand that morning. His tone was light, a tempting humor, but Juliet couldn't shake Miriam's warning. She nodded, responded when she needed to, touched Kingsley's arm with affection. Yet her mind kept circling back to the same question. Why would a nurse she trusted make her hide a note from her own husband? Have you ever sensed something wasn't right, even when the person in front of you seemed completely sincere? A tone, a detail, a hesitation, something small that made you pause and wonder if there was more beneath the surface. Juliet wasn't suspicious by nature. She loved deeply. She trusted fully, but she also knew when something felt off, and this moment felt deeply off. Kingsley continued talking, unaware of the storm building beside him. Juliet's eyes lowered to the note once more, its corners visible between her fingers. She hadn't opened it yet. She wasn't ready, but she knew one thing. Whatever Miriam wanted her to see, whatever she needed Juliet to discover, it wasn't something that should be spoken aloud in a hospital room. Not with the warning Miriam had whispered. Someone is watching. Juliet swallowed hard, pushing down the fear that tried to rise. She would open the note when the time was right, when no one else could hear her breath catch, when she could prepare herself for whatever truth lay inside. But for now, she had to remain calm. She had to smile. She had to act as though nothing at all had shifted. She reached for Kingsley's hand, squeezing it gently, feeling his warmth, the warmth of a man she adored, a man she trusted with her whole heart. But trust didn't erase reality, and reality was whispering to her now, quietly but firmly. Something wasn't adding up. Juliet had no idea yet that this quiet moment in a hospital room was the beginning of a path that would test everything she believed about her marriage, her safety, and the truth. And it all started with a note she hadn't even opened. Juliet waited until Kingsley drifted into a light rest, his breathing soft and steady, before she quietly stepped out of the room. The weight of the unopened note pressed against her palm as she walked toward the restroom, the only place she could guarantee solitude. She closed the door behind her, locked it, exhaled. For a moment, she simply stood there, staring at the folded paper as if it carried heat. The tile felt cool beneath her feet, the overhead light steady and calm, the exact opposite of what pulsed through her chest. Juliet held the note up, her hands trembling just enough to betray how deeply Miriam's warning had unsettled her. "Lord," she whispered softly, "give me strength for whatever this is." She unfolded the note. 3 words stared back at her. Direct, clear, intentional. Juliet's breath hitched. She blinked, hoping maybe she misread. But the words didn't change. 3 simple words that instantly threw her understanding of Kingsley's accident into doubt. Why would Miriam send this? What did she see? What did she know? Juliet leaned against the sink, Trying to steady her breathing, she replayed Kingsley's explanation. The skillet, the slip, the morning mishap. Everything he said sounded normal. But if Miriam believed something was off, Juliet couldn't ignore it. Not with that level of urgency. Not with that tone. Not with that warning. Someone is watching. Her eyes closed briefly as she gathered herself. She folded the note again, tucking it securely out of sight. She couldn't fall apart. She couldn't let panic guide her. Juliet had faced challenges before, growing up, loving deeply, pushing through hardship, and she knew how to stay steady even when the ground shifted beneath her feet. She washed her hands out of habit, giving herself one more breath to appear composed. When she re-entered the hallway, she wore the same gentle expression she always carried, warm, calm, unshakable. Kingsley looked up when she stepped back inside the room. "Everything all right?" Juliet smiled softly. "Everything's fine," but inside, she was already preparing to follow Miriam's instruction. She would check the timeline. She would look deeper. She would understand what truly happened. Because whatever secret hid behind that fracture, behind Kingsley's quiet embarrassment, behind the nurse's warning, Juliet was ready to face it. Even if it changed everything. The moment Juliet received the call, she didn't wait for details. She grabbed her keys, slipped on her shoes, and hurried out the door with a pace that broke her usual steady composure. The drive to Moneta Memorial Hospital felt longer than it should have, even though she knew the roads better than anyone who grew up in that town. Her mind raced faster than her car, thoughts overlapping, fears forming, hope pushing back against every unsettling possibility. She loved Kingsley differently from anyone she had ever loved before. Her heart had learned a deeper language with him, a blend of comfort, protection, partnership, and admiration. So when she pushed through the hospital doors, breath uneven and eyes searching, the air around her felt charged with urgency she couldn't ignore. The receptionist recognized her immediately. Everyone in Moneta did. Juliet didn't even need to say Kingsley's last name. The moment she spoke his first name, the nurse nodded with quiet understanding, her tone gentle and reassuring. "He's stable," she said. Stable didn't stop Juliet's heart from pounding. Stable didn't erase the fear that clung to her ribs. Stable was the only word she could hold on to until she saw him with her own eyes. She thanked the nurse and moved quickly down the hallway, her steps echoing softly against polished floors as she approached his room. With each step, emotions tightened in her chest. Relief, worry, love, a pull that drew her closer to him with every breath. When Juliet stepped inside the room, Kingsley was sitting upright on the hospital bed, arm in a temporary sling, cheeks lightly flushed in embarrassment. He attempted a smile, the kind a man gives when trying to reassure someone he loves, even while hiding his own discomfort. "Baby," he said softly, "before you say anything—" "Oh, I'm going to say something," she replied, letting her voice soften the moment rather than harden it. "How do you break your arm making eggs?" "Eggs?" Kingsley. He winced. with a half-smile. Caught. It wasn't the eggs, he tried. It was the skillet. Juliet blinked at him, folding her arms. So, you're telling me the skillet defeated you? Kingsley lowered his gaze, clearing his throat, as if preparing a defense. It fell. I tried to catch it. Momentum wasn't on my side. Juliet shook her head slowly, unable to stop the small smile tugging at her lips. She walked closer to him, letting her concern settle behind her eyes. Kingsley, you scared me, she said softly. He exhaled, guilt flickering across his face. I know, and I'm sorry. His explanation was simple, almost too simple, yet Juliet didn't question him. Not yet. She touched his cheek gently, grounding herself in the warmth of his skin. Her husband, a man who analyzed everything, who took calculated steps in business and in life, had somehow managed to injure himself over breakfast. Strange, but not impossible. At least, that's what she told herself for now. Juliet eased onto the chair beside his bed, letting her eyes settle on him the way one might study something precious that had narrowly escaped danger. Despite her fear, she didn't want to drown him in worry. That wasn't how they moved through challenges together. You know, she began, tilting her head slightly, this is why I tell you to leave the kitchen experiments to me. Kingsley raised a brow. Experiments? I was making eggs. That you nearly lost a battle to, she teased gently. He laughed, a warm sound that eased some of the tension wrapped around her chest. Juliet loved that laugh. It reminded her that even when things frightened her, their bond had a way of tethering her back to peace. I really thought I could flip the skillet like a chef, he admitted, shaking his head. Juliet sighed dramatically. You barely flip pancakes, Kingsley. He rested his good hand over his heart. You wound me with your honesty. Juliet leaned in, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. You're lucky you're cute. You married me, so I assume that's permanent. Their banter filled the room with warmth. It was familiar. It was comforting. It was everything Juliet needed in that moment to pull her out of the panic she'd carried in. But behind every smile she offered, there was still a tremor of fear underneath. A fear she didn't voice because she wanted him to rest, not stress. Her heart loved him too deeply to let worry scar the moment. But worry was there, quiet and persistent. A gentle knock sounded before the door opened. Miriam stepped inside with the same calm presence Juliet always admired in her. Her scrubs were neat, her posture straight, her expression balanced between warmth and discipline. Good afternoon, Miriam greeted, giving both of them a polite nod. Kingsley, I need to check your vitals. Kingsley offered a nod in return, shifting slightly to accommodate her work. Juliet watched carefully. She liked Miriam. The nurse handled everything with precision, but she also carried a natural ease, something that made patients feel cared for rather than processed. Her tone was steady, her movements efficient, her eyes focused. Miriam checked the sling placement, adjusted the band gently, then tapped a few notes onto her tablet. "You're stable," she said at last. "The fracture should heal fine with rest and follow-ups." Her tone stayed even, but something in her eyes flickered for a moment. Subtle, brief, but enough for Juliet to notice. Miriam wasn't just assessing his injury. She was studying something else, something she didn't speak yet. As Miriam stepped back from the bedside, her gaze shifted, not to Kingsley, but to Juliet. There was a focus there, sharper than before, almost cautious. Juliet lifted her brows slightly, sensing the shift. "Juliet," Miriam said gently, "if you need anything, let me know." Juliet nodded. "Thank you," but Miriam didn't look away. Her eyes held Juliet's for a fraction longer than normal, long enough for Juliet to feel the tension tighten in her chest again. It wasn't the same fear she felt when she first rushed into the hospital. It was something new, something quiet, yet unsettling. Miriam's professionalism remained intact, but her attention seemed split. One part on Kingsley's condition and another on Juliet's awareness. There was meaning behind that look, a message she hadn't delivered yet, a reason Juliet couldn't name, but could feel. Moments later, Miriam turned and left the room. Juliet watched the door close behind her, a small crease forming on her forehead. Something was shifting, something she didn't understand yet. And that subtle glance from Miriam, it was the beginning. Juliet had just settled back into her chair beside Kingsley when the door opened again. Miriam stepped inside, her expression steady, but carrying a subtle difference, something more pointed than before. She glanced at Kingsley briefly, then shifted her focus toward Juliet. "Mrs. Juliet," Miriam said softly, "may I speak with you for a moment?" Juliet blinked, surprised. "Of course." Kingsley looked between them, confused but not alarmed. Juliet reassured him with a quick touch to his forearm before following Miriam into the hallway. The walk was short, but Juliet felt tension building with every step. Miriam didn't speak until they reached a quiet section near the supply closet, a space away from passing staff and listening ears. Juliet noticed how intentionally Miriam chose the spot. It wasn't random, wasn't casual. Something was different now. Miriam turned toward her, her voice lowering slightly. "I need to give you something, and I need you to listen carefully." Juliet's heart tightened. "What's going on?" Miriam inhaled slowly, her eyes steady. "Just trust me." Miriam's hand slipped into her pocket, retrieving a small folded piece of paper. It was discreet enough to be overlooked, yet noticeable enough to be important. She held it with 2 fingers, her movements careful and controlled. "This," Miriam said quietly, "is for you." Juliet frowned slightly. "A note?" Miriam didn't answer directly. Instead, she extended her hand quickly, almost too quickly, as though the action itself carried risk. Juliet instinctively reached out and took the paper, feeling the heat of Mariam's urgency more than the paper's weight. Everything about the exchange felt intentional, swift, secretive, protected. Mariam immediately stepped back, her eyes shifting toward the hallway, as if checking to ensure no one had noticed. Juliet tucked the folded note into her palm, feeling the corners press against her skin. It felt heavier than Mariam's expression let on. Mariam leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice even more. So low, Juliet had to concentrate to catch every word. "Juliet, listen carefully," Mariam whispered. "Read that note when you're alone. Not here. Not in front of anyone." Juliet's breath caught. "Why?" "Because this isn't something you react to publicly," Mariam replied. "Keep your expression calm. Don't let anyone see anything change on your face." Juliet blinked at her, stunned by the seriousness behind Mariam's tone. "What is this about?" Juliet asked, her heart beginning to pound again. Mariam's gaze softened, not with comfort, but with concern. "I'm trying to protect you. That's why I'm telling you to wait. No matter what's inside, don't open it until you're somewhere private." There was something in Mariam's expression that Juliet had never seen before, not during checkups, not during small conversations, not even when Mariam delivered difficult news to other patients. Wasn't fear. It wasn't panic. It was urgency, deep and controlled. Mariam stepped back, straightening her posture as if shifting back into her professional role. But the seriousness in her eyes lingered. Juliet stood in the hallway, the note still warm from Mariam's hand. Confusion pressed against her ribs, tightening her breath. She tried to make sense of the moment, but the pieces didn't fit. Kingsley's injury, Mariam's sudden shift in behavior, a secret note passed in the hallway, instructions to hide her reaction, warnings spoken with quiet intensity. Her chest tightened with a blend of fear and disbelief. She wished she could glance at the paper immediately, but Mariam's warning echoed too sharply in her mind. "Read it alone." Juliet swallowed hard. She hated feeling unsteady, but Mariam had placed her in a space where uncertainty held more weight than clarity. She didn't know what the note held, yet she felt it pulling at her thoughts already, demanding her attention. Her hands trembled slightly, the folded edges scratching against her palm as she held it tighter. She tried to slow her breathing, grounding herself the way she always did during stressful moments. But this wasn't just stress. This was a shift in her reality she wasn't prepared for. She didn't want Kingsley to see the worry forming behind her eyes. She didn't want to raise suspicion before she even understood what she was dealing with. She had to stay calm, for him and for herself. She took one final breath, forcing her expression back into neutrality before stepping toward the room again. When she walked inside, Kingsley looked up immediately, concern etched into his face. "Everything okay?" he asked. Juliet felt the note burn like a flame against her skin, but her smile held steady. "Yes," she answered gently. "Everything's fine." She just wanted to discuss your discharge papers. Kingsley nodded easily, accepting her explanation without question. Juliet sat down beside him again, placing her free hand on his uninjured arm. On the outside, she appeared calm, steady, unshaken, but inside, her thoughts raced. Her heartbeat was uneven, her fingers pressed against the hidden note, as if trying to absorb the message through the paper. She didn't know what Miriam had seen. She didn't know why secrecy was necessary. She didn't know how deep this situation ran. But she knew she had to read the note, and she knew she had to do it alone. For now, she simply sat beside her husband, offering him comfort, while holding a truth she hadn't uncovered yet, a truth that was waiting behind a folded piece of paper. Juliet waited for the right moment, a moment when Kingsley seemed comfortable, relaxed, and no longer studying her face for signs of worry. Once she felt confident he wasn't paying attention to the tension she carried, she stood slowly, brushing her palm across her dress to steady herself. "I'm going to step out for a moment," she said softly. Kingsley nodded. "Take your time, love." The warmth in his voice deepened the guilt Juliet felt for keeping something from him, even if only temporarily. But she couldn't ignore Miriam's warning. She needed privacy, a quiet space to confront whatever truth had been pressed into her hand. She walked down the hallway with a calmness she didn't feel inside. The restroom door closed behind her with a soft click, sealing her away from the world for a few precious minutes. Juliet paused at the sink, staring at her reflection. Her chest rose and fell in slow breaths, attempting to steady nerves that refused to settle. This was it, the moment she would uncover the meaning behind Miriam's urgency. She locked the door. Juliet pulled the small folded paper from her palm, turning it over once, as if the outside might offer clues before she even opened it. It didn't. The paper was plain, unmarked, deceptively simple. But the weight of it felt anything but simple. She held it between her fingers, the texture slightly rough, the edges worn as though Miriam had debated giving it to her several times before actually doing so. "All right," Juliet whispered to herself. "Whatever this is, you can handle it." Slowly, carefully, she unfolded the first crease, then the second, then the final fold that revealed the message inside. The restroom felt quieter than before, almost still, as she lowered her eyes to the handwritten words. Her breath stalled. Juliet stared at the note, expecting more, expecting a sentence, a warning, an explanation, something that offered even a glimpse of clarity. But instead, there were only 3 words, written neatly in Miriam's handwriting. The simplicity made them even more jarring. Juliet read the phrase again and again. It didn't change. It didn't expand to explain itself. Didn't point her in a clearer direction. Yet something about it dropped heavily into her chest. The words weren't dramatic on their own, but the meaning behind them. The meaning Miriam intended. That was where the weight lived. What timeline? Juliet whispered. "What am I supposed to check?" Her stomach tightened. The room didn't feel quite the same anymore. It was as if the note had shifted the atmosphere, pulling her into a different understanding of the moment she walked in here. Whatever Miriam had seen, whatever details she had noticed, it was important enough to risk passing this note in secret. And that alone made Juliet's heart beat unevenly. Juliet pressed her back against the counter, gripping the edge with her free hand, while the note trembled lightly in the other. It wasn't fear of Miriam. It wasn't fear of the hospital. It was fear of not knowing. Fear of what she might uncover when she followed Miriam's instruction. Her thoughts raced. Was Kingsley truly hurt making breakfast? Why did the timeline even matter? Did something happen earlier? Or somewhere else? Had Kingsley hidden something from her? Was Miriam trying to save her from something she didn't see yet? She hated uncertainty. She hated the way confusion curled itself around her spine. But worst of all, she hated the possibility that something serious had happened to Kingsley. Something he didn't tell her. Pain tightened behind her eyes. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself with the determination she had grown up with. The determination that guided her through difficult moments in life. Juliet folded the note again with care. Even though the words unsettled her, she handled it almost delicately, as if respecting the gravity Miriam had placed in her hands. This wasn't just a message. It a direction, a warning, and possibly a doorway into truths she had not prepared to face. Juliet washed her hands, allowing the cool water to anchor her back to the moment. She needed composure. She needed clarity. She needed to make sure that when she walked out of this restroom, nothing in her expression betrayed the storm inside her. She dried her hands, gave herself one final look in the mirror, and forced her breathing to match a calm rhythm, slow and steady, even if her heartbeat refused to follow. When she stepped into the hallway again, her face carried the same gentle warmth she had entered the hospital with. She walked back into Kingsley's room. Kingsley lifted his eyes immediately, studying her with the familiarity of a man who knew her inside and out. "Was okay?" he asked. His tone was simple, casual. But Juliet felt every syllable press against the secret in her pocket. "Yes," she replied softly, pulling a smile onto her face. "Everything's fine." Kingsley relaxed again, unaware of the shift that had just taken place. Juliet sat beside him, placing her hand on his good arm, offering him warmth while carrying a truth he didn't know she held. Inside, the dread lingered, quiet, heavy, impossible to ignore, because Juliet now knew that something wasn't aligning. Miriam believed it. The note suggested it, and Juliet could feel it. The timeline mattered, and sooner rather than later, she would have to find out why. Juliet waited until Kingsley settled back against the pillows, his breathing even and his attention drifting toward the muted television in the corner. She had been sitting beside him, offering smiles and gentle touches, but the note in her pocket pulsed through her thoughts like a quiet alarm. She could not ignore it, not after seeing the urgency in Miriam's eyes. When she stepped into the hallway, she scanned for the nurse, with a sense of purpose she didn't bother masking. She found Mariam near the station, tapping information into her tablet with steady hands. Her posture was calm, but Juliet could sense that same underlying tension from earlier, something unspoken, yet present. "Mariam," Juliet said softly. The nurse looked up immediately, as though she had been expecting her. Juliet didn't waste time. "I opened the note." Miriam's expression remained composed, but her eyes sharpened slightly, not with surprise, but with confirmation. She nodded once, then gestured subtly toward the far end of the hallway, choosing a quieter spot away from passing staff. Juliet followed, recognizing that whatever came next wasn't meant for public ears. When they reached the secluded corner, Juliet crossed her arms, steadying herself. "What does this mean? Why did you tell me to check the timeline?" Mariam exhaled slowly, choosing her words. "Because something isn't right with what your husband told you." That single sentence was enough to make Juliet's pulse tense again. Mariam leaned slightly closer, her tone controlled and professional. When Kingsley came in, his injury didn't match a fresh incident from this morning. "I've seen enough fractures to recognize the stages, the swelling, the discoloration, the signs beneath the skin. They suggest it happened earlier." Juliet's brows pulled together. "How much earlier?" Mariam shook her head gently. "I can't give an exact hour without imaging comparisons, but certainly not from the time he mentioned. The body tells its own story, Juliet. And his body is telling me this injury was already forming long before he said he fell." A wave of disbelief rolled over Juliet. She pressed her hand lightly to her chest. "But he wouldn't lie to me. He wouldn't hide something like that." Mariam's gaze softened. "People hide things for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of protection, sometimes because they believe they can fix the problem before anyone else notices." Mariam continued, her voice lowering. "I'm not telling you your husband meant harm, but details matter. Timelines matter. Actions matter. Compare the facts to what he told you. Look for what doesn't line up." Juliet swallowed hard. "You're asking me to question him." "I'm asking you to observe," Mariam corrected gently. "Check what he says against what you see, what you know, and what doesn't change when someone tries to soften the truth." She paused, letting her next words land with intention. "When timelines don't match, something happened outside the story being told." Juliet held her breath for a moment, absorbing the weight of that statement. She glanced toward Kingsley's room at the far end of the hallway. A part of her felt guilty for even listening to this, but another part, the part that grew up learning discernment and intuition, knew she couldn't dismiss it. As Juliet walked back toward the room, Mariam's words echoed in her mind with clarity that felt sharper than before. She paused just outside the doorway, watching Kingsley through the small opening in the curtain. He sat quietly, but something about the way he held his shoulders caught her attention. Stiff, guarded, almost as if bracing against more than physical pain. His eyes lingered on the floor before drifting to the door again, checking whether she was returning. Juliet noticed the subtle shift in his breath, the slight tension in his jaw. He didn't look like a man who had simply slipped in the kitchen. He looked unsettled, not guilty, not deceptive, but unsettled. And Juliet felt a sudden coldness slip through her spine as she realized she had seen hints earlier. Small, almost forgettable details that now came into focus. The hesitation before he repeated his story. The quick smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The way he avoided describing the fall in detail. Juliet inhaled slowly. Miriam was right. Something didn't line up. She stepped back into the room, her face calm, but her thoughts sharper than before. The hospital discharged Kingsley later in the afternoon. Juliet helped him into the passenger seat of their car, fastening the seatbelt carefully over his sling before closing the door. She circled around to the driver's side, but her thoughts stayed fixed on Miriam's voice. Compare the facts to his words. Juliet started the engine, letting the soft hum fill the quiet space between them. As she pulled out of the parking lot, Kingsley shifted slightly, adjusting his injured arm with a small wince. "You're okay?" Juliet asked, keeping her tone gentle. "Yeah," he said with a faint chuckle. "Just sore. Gravity won today." Juliet smiled lightly, her eyes remaining on the road. She didn't want to push too hard too soon, but she needed clarity, or at least clues. "So," she began softly, "you said it happened around 8 this morning, right?" Kingsley nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, I got up early to make breakfast." Juliet kept her tone calm. "And you felt fine all morning? No dizziness? No pain before the fall?" He glanced at her, slightly surprised by the question. "No, nothing like that." "Why?" Shrugged a little. "Just wanted to understand how it happened. It's not like you to lose balance." Kingsley exhaled a soft laugh. "Today wasn't my best day." Juliet nodded slowly, offering a warm smile that didn't reveal the calculations happening behind her eyes. Her questions weren't confrontational. They were subtle, simple, and wrapped in concern. She wanted him to feel safe speaking, even if he wasn't speaking the full truth yet. Inside, she listened closely to every detail, every tone shift, every pause that didn't belong. As they continued driving down the 2-lane road leading back into Moneta, Juliet slipped in another question, one that sounded casual but carried weight. "When you fell, did you try to call me right away?" Kingsley's eyes flickered, a tiny movement, so brief that anyone else might have missed it. Juliet didn't miss anything. He cleared his throat lightly before answering. "No, I didn't want to worry you. I figured I'd be fine once the pain settled." Juliet kept her focus forward, but inside she marked the moment. It was subtle. A momentary shift in his expression, a blink slower than usual, a breath that carried tension beneath the surface. Mariam's words echoed again. Observe, what doesn't change when someone tries to soften the truth? Kingsley wasn't lying outright. His tone wasn't sharp. His demeanor wasn't defensive. But Juliet recognized that small hesitation. She grew up surrounded by people who knew how to read truth, even when spoken softly. She learned early how to see the tiny changes that revealed more than someone intended. The flicker she saw just now, it wasn't guilt, wasn't fear, it was uncertainty. The kind that comes when someone is trying to decide how much to reveal. Juliet tightened her grip on the steering wheel slightly. Something was off. She felt it now more clearly than ever. Despite everything swirling inside her, Juliet never let her expression shift. She reached over with her free hand and brushed his arm gently, offering comfort the way she always did. "It's all right," she murmured. "You don't have to be embarrassed." Kingsley relaxed at her touch, leaning slightly back into the seat. "Thank you for today. I know I scared you." Juliet nodded, her tone warm. Anyone would have been scared if they got a call like that. Inside, her thoughts didn't match her steady voice. Fear pressed at her chest, not the immediate fear of injury, but the fear of something deeper she had not yet uncovered. She didn't want to accuse him. She didn't want to imagine the worst. But she could no longer ignore the tension wrapped around his story. Still, she refused to let him see her concern. She didn't want to make him feel cornered. Not until she fully understood what she was confronting. So she hid her dread. She smiled. She breathed slowly. She kept everything calm on the surface, because Juliet always moved with wisdom. She didn't jump into conclusions. She observed. She waited. She let truth reveal itself in its own time. And in her experience, truth always did. As they pulled into the driveway of their home, Kingsley glanced at Juliet again, studying her with the quiet perceptiveness he'd always had. "You seem distant," he said carefully. "Did something else happen at the hospital?" Juliet turned off the engine and looked at him with a softness that didn't give anything away. "It's been a long day, Kingsley. I think everything just hit me at once." He nodded slowly, but his eyes held a searching quality, as though he sensed a shift he couldn't name. Kingsley wasn't oblivious. He knew Juliet well, and he could feel the subtle difference in her energy. And he didn't push, not because he didn't care, but because he trusted that she would speak when she was ready. Juliet offered him a light smile, brushing her hand across his arm once more before stepping out of the car to help him. She moved with quiet grace, balancing her internal turmoil with the outward peace she displayed. Kingsley followed her into the house, still feeling an unease he couldn't quite understand. Something in Juliet's eyes had changed today. Not in love, but in certainty. She wasn't worried about the injury anymore. She was thinking about something else, something he hadn't told her. And though he didn't know it yet, the truth he tried to contain was already beginning to show through the cracks of his story. Night settled quietly over the house, wrapping the rooms in a stillness Juliet rarely paid attention to. Kingsley rested on his side of the bed, his injured arm supported with pillows, his breath slow and even. Juliet lay beside him for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm her mind. But sleep refused to come. Every moment from the hospital replayed in her thoughts. Miriam's urgency, the note, the inconsistencies in Kingsley's story, his hesitation during the drive home. Nothing overlapped cleanly. Nothing sat right. She shifted slightly to look at him. The soft rise and fall of his chest should have brought her comfort. Instead, it reminded her that he was hiding something, not out of malice, but out of fear, and fear told her that whatever he wasn't saying mattered. When Juliet was sure he was fully asleep, she slipped out of bed slowly, her movements careful and controlled. She didn't want the mattress to dip too noticeably, or the floorboards to creak. She moved through the darkness with the steadiness she'd learned throughout life, the steadiness she needed now more than ever. This wasn't about suspicion anymore. It was about clarity. She needed the truth. Juliet retrieved Kingsley's smartwatch from the dresser, holding it in her hands like something fragile. The device's screen glowed softly as she navigated through the health logs, something she had access to since they'd connected their safety settings long ago. She scrolled through the day's reports, expecting to see a spike around the time he claimed the accident happened. But the entry she found froze her in place. Heart rate spike, 2:13 a.m. impact detected, 2:13 a.m. fall recognition alert, 2:14 a.m. Juliet's lips parted slightly, her breath shaky. The date shown was unmistakable. It was recorded the night before he claimed he fell. His accident didn't happen at breakfast. It didn't happen while making eggs. It happened at 2 in the morning. Juliet pressed her thumb to the screen, as if steadying herself against the cold truth. She read the data again, hoping she was misinterpreting. But the numbers didn't change. The watch had captured everything. The sudden rise in his heartbeat, the abrupt impact, the automatic alert their devices were programmed to give. Her chest tightened. Kingsley hadn't just misstated the timeline. He had changed it completely. Juliet exhaled slowly, trying to manage the fear creeping into her chest. She moved to the living room and accessed the Home app on her tablet. All their internal and external cameras were synced there, a security measure Kingsley insisted on after they moved into the house. She tapped the activity logs. At first, everything seemed normal. Then her eyes widened. 2:11 a.m. Cameras turned off manually. Kitchen camera disabled. Hallway camera disabled. Back entry camera disabled. He disabled them, one after another, all within the same minute. Her hand trembled slightly. Kingsley wasn't a careless man. He didn't make impulsive decisions. He was methodical, structured, thoughtful. He turned off the cameras. He did it on purpose. Juliet swallowed hard, pressing a hand to her forehead. Her thoughts grew heavier with each discovery, each detail pulling her deeper into a truth she didn't yet understand. Why did he turn the cameras off? Who was he trying to avoid? What was he protecting? She forced herself to breathe slowly, refusing to crumble under the weight of the unknown. But the questions wouldn't stop forming. Juliet opened the audio history section next. Their smart home system recorded voice commands. Nothing invasive, just standard logging. Most entries were harmless. Play music, set alarm, dim the lights. But then she found a command time-stamped 2:11 a.m., the same time the cameras were shut down. She tapped the file. A few seconds of heavy breathing played first. Then Kingsley's voice came through, strained, tense, almost uneasy. "I need to—" "No, that's not right. I should have told her." The recording cut abruptly. Juliet covered her mouth with her hand, feeling her heart sink. The tone in Kingsley's voice wasn't casual frustration. It wasn't mild annoyance. It was the sound of someone wrestling with a truth they had held onto too long and regretted hiding. He had been scared. He had been conflicted. He had been protecting something or someone from her. Juliet closed her eyes, shaking her head slowly as the audio echoed in her thoughts. She didn't want to believe her husband had been carrying a secret heavy enough to make him speak to himself like that, but she could no longer deny it. Something happened that night, something he didn't want her to know. And the fall wasn't an accident at breakfast. It was part of whatever he was hiding. The moment the truth settled inside her, Juliet felt her strength falter. She sank into the nearest chair, pressing her palms against her eyes as tears spilled silently. She didn't cry because she felt betrayed. She didn't cry because of the lie about the skillet. She cried because something had happened to the man she loved, something big enough, frightening enough, serious enough that he couldn't bring himself to tell her. Kingsley had always been her anchor, her calm, her steady force in a world that wasn't always gentle. Knowing that he had been alone in a moment of fear, a moment he should have shared with her, broke something inside her. She cried because she was scared for him. She cried because she wanted to protect him. And she cried because she knew this truth was only the beginning. Juliet wiped her tears gently, steadying her breath. She would not fall apart. She would not sit in confusion. She would face this. She would uncover the full truth. She would hold her marriage together with the same strength she always carried, even when the truth hurt. Juliet closed the tablet, inhaled deeply, and stood. Whatever Kingsley was caught in, whatever danger lingered unseen, she was now part of it, and she wasn't turning back. After discovering the late-night fall through his smartwatch data, Juliet returned to the bedroom quietly. Kingsley remained asleep, his injured arm resting heavily against the pillows, breathing slow and steady. The soft rise of his chest made the earlier discoveries even more painful. How could something so calm hide something so heavy? Juliet moved to his nightstand, where his phone lay face down beside a half-empty glass of water. She hesitated for a moment, not because she doubted her right to the truth. Their relationship had always been open, but because she feared what she might find. Still, Miriam's warning lingered in her mind, guiding her hand. She picked up the phone carefully and unlocked it with the shared passcode they both agreed on months ago, back when trust wasn't a question, but a foundation. With a quiet breath, she scrolled through the recent messages, then the call logs. Nothing stood out at first. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, but Juliet knew how to read between the lines of silence. Sometimes what wasn't visible carried the real truth. She tapped into the messaging app again, this time searching through drafts, a section most people never even touched. Her fingers paused when she saw the unsent message. Her heart began to beat in an unsteady rhythm. There it was, a truth he typed, but never sent. Juliet, I've been hiding something. The draft opened with a gentle tap, revealing the words Kingsley had typed, but couldn't bring himself to send. Juliet, I've been hiding something. The message stopped there, unfinished, incomplete, a doorway into a confession he never crossed. Juliet stared at the words, reading them again and again, even though nothing changed. They felt heavy, as if each letter was weighted with unspoken fear. Juliet's breath faltered. This message wasn't written by someone trying to deceive her. It was written by someone struggling, someone afraid, someone conflicted. The ellipsis at the end made it worse. It hinted at everything he wanted to say but couldn't, the truth he had buried beneath his calm demeanor and gentle smiles. Juliet held the phone with both hands now, trying to steady the emotions climbing through her. She had suspected something deeper since Miriam gave her the note, but seeing this message confirmed it. Kingsley wasn't simply hiding details about a fall. He was hiding a truth he believed could affect both of them. The weight of the unfinished message pressed into Juliet's chest. Her eyes softened, and tears filled the corners without fully falling. It wasn't anger she felt, not even close. What pooled inside her was a mixture of sorrow and understanding. Kingsley had been struggling with something alone. He had carried it in silence, and silence, she knew, could be exhausting. She sat on the edge of the bed, phone resting in her lap, as she looked over at him. His face, peaceful and unaware, didn't match the turmoil she had uncovered. Her heart didn't break because he hid something. Her heart broke because of why he hid it. He was the man who always solved problems before bringing them to her. The man who shielded her from stress. The man who believed protecting her meant carrying burdens quietly. But this burden had cracked, and Juliet felt it deeply. She pressed a hand gently to her chest, feeling the ache that came from loving someone so deeply that their pain became your own. As she wiped her eyes carefully, she whispered softly into the quiet room, "You should have told me, Kingsley." The truth was no longer optional. It was necessary. Juliet set the phone back on the nightstand with care, taking a moment to steady her breath. She didn't want to confront him in anger. That wasn't their way. She wanted honesty, not conflict. She wanted clarity, not chaos. But she knew she couldn't ignore what she found. She couldn't pretend life was normal. She couldn't wait for the truth to reveal itself on its own. This time, she would bring it to the surface. Juliet wiped the final trace of tears, inhaling deeply as she sat straighter. Her strength returned slowly but firmly, the same strength she'd carried from childhood into adulthood. She wasn't afraid of the truth. She never had been. What frightened her was the idea of Kingsley carrying something alone that could hurt them both. She looked at him again, with a mixture of love and resolve. He was still asleep, unaware that the truth had already stepped out of the shadows. Juliet stood, ready to face the truth, ready to listen, ready to understand, ready to confront without breaking him down. Not out of suspicion, out of love. She whispered softly, almost as if preparing herself more than him. "We're going to talk, Kingsley. Tomorrow, we're going to talk." And this time, she wasn't waiting for a note, a device log, or a hint. She was going directly to the source. The next morning carried a quiet tension that Juliet felt long before she opened her eyes. Kingsley was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with his sling supported by a pillow, and his gaze fixed on the floor. He looked lost in thought, unaware that Juliet was watching him. She took a moment, breathed, grounding herself. Last night had shaken her, but she refused to let confrontation turn into conflict. She wanted truth, not turbulence. "Kingsley," she said softly. He startled slightly and turned toward her. His expression warmed when he saw her awake, but there was something dim behind his eyes, something tired, something that mirrored the heavy truth he'd been carrying. "Good morning," he murmured. Juliet sat up, pulling the covers aside. "We talk for a moment." Her voice was steady, gentle, without accusation, but it carried purpose. And Kingsley sensed it immediately. His shoulders stiffened just slightly, the kind of movement that came from bracing rather than relaxing. He nodded faintly. "Of course." Juliet approached him slowly, sitting beside him. She didn't cross her arms or create distance. She sat close enough for him to know she wasn't there to attack him. She was there to understand him. Juliet folded her hands in her lap, choosing her words carefully. Directness worked best with Kingsley. He always appreciated clarity, even when it was uncomfortable. "I need to ask you something," she began, "and I want you to answer me honestly." Kingsley's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. Juliet met his eyes without wavering. "What really happened?" The question landed heavily between them. No softness, No dancing around it. Just truth waiting to surface. Kingsley inhaled slowly, as though buying time, his gaze lowering to his feet. He didn't attempt to repeat his earlier story. He didn't deflect. He didn't laugh it off. He simply paused, long enough for Juliet to know the truth she'd uncovered last night wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real. "Juliet," he whispered, voice unsteady. "I didn't fall while cooking." Her heart tightened, but her face remained calm. "No?" His head lifted, surprise flickering across his eyes. Not because she knew, but because she had waited until now to confront him. Juliet didn't explain how she knew. She didn't mention the watch, the logs, or the draft message. She wanted the truth to come from him, not from evidence, not from pressure. So she remained quiet, waiting. Kingsley exhaled a breath that sounded almost painful. His shoulders dropped, giving up the last bit of resistance he had been holding on to. For the first time since the hospital, Juliet saw his fear without the mask he tried to wear. He ran his good hand across his face slowly, as though trying to gather the strength to begin. "I didn't want you to be dragged into this," he said quietly. "I didn't want to scare you. I thought if I could handle it alone, it would pass, and you wouldn't have to deal with any of it." "Deal with what?" Juliet asked gently. Kingsley's fingers trembled slightly as he lowered his hand. "With what happened at 2 in the morning." Juliet kept still, giving him space to continue at his own pace. He swallowed hard, his voice softer now. Not weak, but weighed down. "I should have told you sooner," he whispered. "I just didn't know how." The fear in his voice wasn't about being caught in a lie. It was fear of the truth itself. And Juliet's heart softened despite her pain. She reached out and rested her hand lightly on his thigh, a gesture that said, "I'm here. Speak." He met her gaze again, and this time the walls he'd held up since the fall finally broke. Kingsley drew in a shaky breath. There was someone in the house. Juliet's body went still, her breath freezing in her chest, not from panic, but from the gravity of his words. At 2 in the morning, he continued, "I heard something in the hallway. I thought it was you at first, but when I stepped out of the bedroom, I saw a figure near the kitchen." Juliet listened intently, her hand still resting on him, grounding him. He swallowed again. "I didn't recognize him at first. I only saw the shape of him, the way he moved. Fast, quiet, purposeful." Her pulse steadied, not racing, but sharpening her focus. Then Kingsley's voice lowered. "When I tried to confront him, he pushed past me. I lost my footing on the tile and hit the floor hard. I landed on my arm wrong." Juliet felt a deep ache inside, not fear for herself, but heartbreak for the fear he had endured alone. "Kingsley," she whispered. He shook his head slightly. "I didn't call out to you because I was afraid he was still in the house, and I didn't want you in danger. I shut off the cameras because I panicked. I didn't want the intruder to use the feeds or see us moving around. Juliet blinked, realizing now how his fear had shaped every decision. Not cowardice, not deception, protection. He wasn't hiding the truth because he didn't trust her. He hid it because he loved her more than he feared the consequences. She placed her other hand over his gently, steady, and warm. Kingsley, you should have told me. I know, he whispered brokenly. I was trying to protect you, but I made everything worse. Juliet stayed close beside Kingsley, her hands gently holding his as he gathered the strength to continue. The morning light filtered softly through their curtains, but nothing about the moment felt light. Kingsley's eyes held the weight of a truth that had been locked inside him since the night of the fall. At 2 a.m, he said quietly, I heard the front door creak. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to wake me up. I thought it might have been the wind until I saw a shadow move across the hallway. Juliet felt her heartbeat shift, not from fear of the intruder, but from imagining the terror Kingsley faced alone. He continued, I stepped out of the bedroom, trying not to startle whoever it was, maybe hoping it was nothing. But the moment I saw the silhouette near the kitchen, I knew it wasn't a mistake. Someone was inside. Juliet listened with unwavering focus. I called out, Kingsley said, his voice tightening, and he turned toward me for a split second. Then he rushed forward. I grabbed his arm, but he shoved me hard. I lost my balance and hit the floor. Juliet squeezed his hands gently. He didn't look away. I thought he might attack again, Kingsley whispered. But instead he stepped back, looked straight at me, and walked out through the back door. Not running, not panicking, just leaving, like he had already gotten what he came for. A deep chill rolled through Juliet's spine. What was he looking for? She asked softly. Kingsley exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that came with dread. That's what scared me. I didn't know. Kingsley reached into the drawer beside the bed, using his good hand. He moved slowly, as though afraid Juliet might recoil from the truth inside. When he pulled out the folded slip of paper, Juliet instantly recognized the grim familiarity of secrecy. He placed the note in her palm gently. Juliet unfolded it. Only 4 words were written. Sharp, deliberate, unsettling. You know why? Her breath hitched. Not in fear, but in confusion. The message wasn't threatening in a loud way. It was frightening in its quiet confidence. When I found it, Kingsley said softly, it was sitting on the counter beside the knife block. It wasn't crumpled. It wasn't rushed. He left it there, deliberately. Juliet closed the note carefully. Its weight didn't match the paper. It matched the truth she had been chasing since Mariam whispered to her in the hospital. Kingsley, why didn't you tell me this sooner? She asked gently. His voice cracked. Because the note wasn't wrong. I did know why. Kingsley lowered his head, shame pressing into his shoulders. It was someone I used to work with, he admitted softly. A man I had to let go last year. He wasn't handling his responsibilities, and it put the whole project at risk. I tried to help him, gave him second chances, but nothing changed. Juliet listened quietly, absorbing everything. When he was terminated, Kingsley continued. He blamed me for everything, said I ruined his life, said I was the reason he lost everything. Juliet's posture straightened. And you think he came here because of that? Kingsley nodded faintly. I recognized the shape of him when he turned toward me that night. I didn't want to believe it at first. But the note, it was his handwriting. He used to leave updates on my desk in the same style. Juliet felt a cold rush spread through her chest. Not fear, clarity. The pieces fit together now. The late-to-night injury, the cameras being turned off, the draft message he couldn't send, his hesitation, his silence, everything traced back to that night. He's not dangerous in the way you might imagine, Kingsley said, almost apologetically. But he's unpredictable and angry. Juliet looked down at the note again, tracing the words with her thumb. The message didn't feel like a direct threat. It felt like a warning, a reminder, a statement from someone who believed Kingsley owed him something. Kingsley turned toward her fully now, his expression raw and open. I lied because I didn't want you to be scared, he said. I didn't want you thinking someone was targeting us or watching our home. I didn't want you losing sleep or feeling unsafe. Juliet's eyes softened. And, he added quietly, I didn't want you blaming yourself or believing you could have prevented any of it. I thought if I could handle it quietly, it would end quietly. Juliet reached up and touched his cheek gently, the kind of touch that held love, disappointment, and compassion all at once. You shouldn't have carried this alone, she whispered. He closed his eyes, leaning slightly into her palm. I know, but the fear of seeing you shaken, I couldn't bear it. So I hid the truth, and then hiding it became heavier than the truth itself. Juliet felt her chest tighten, not in pain, but in the ache that comes from loving someone who would rather break than burden you. You're my wife, Kingsley said softly. Protecting you felt more important than protecting myself. Juliet moved closer, her voice steady and filled with quiet strength. Kingsley, look at me. He opened his eyes. You're not alone in this, she said firmly. Not anymore. Whatever danger you felt, whatever fear you carried, whatever guilt you've been holding, we face it together. His breath trembled, and Juliet took both of his hands in hers. I married you to walk beside you, she continued. Not behind you, not in the dark. Beside you. We handle life as a team. For the first time since the night of the fall, Kingsley's expression softened, truly softened, as though part of the burden lifted the moment she said those words. I'm sorry, he whispered. Juliet shook her head lightly. Don't apologize for being scared. Apologize only if you ever think you have to protect me by shutting me out. Kingsley nodded slowly. Juliet leaned forward and kissed his forehead gently, sealing the promise she had just made. We will figure this out, she murmured. Together, and for the first time, the truth felt less like a threat and more like a beginning. The next afternoon, Juliet sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped tightly together as she replayed the night's confrontation with Kingsley. The truth had surfaced, but clarity didn't settle the fear growing beneath her ribs. Something still felt unfinished, as though she had pieces of a puzzle without knowing the final image. Kingsley rested in the bedroom, exhausted from the emotional weight of finally confessing. Juliet didn't wake him. Instead, she grabbed her coat and quietly stepped outside, locking the door behind her. She needed answers. Answers only Miriam could finish giving. The drive to Moneta Memorial Hospital was quiet. Juliet held the steering wheel firmly, focusing on the road ahead while her mind drifted through memories of Miriam's earlier warning. Miriam hadn't spoken carelessly at the hospital. Every word felt deliberate, heavy, true. When Juliet arrived, she walked through the sliding doors and headed straight toward the nursing station. Miriam wasn't there, but Juliet recognized her voice down the hallway. She followed it carefully, stopping only when their eyes met. Miriam's expression softened instantly. Juliet, I had a feeling you'd come back. Juliet inhaled slowly. We need to talk. Without hesitation, Miriam gestured toward a private consultation room. Juliet followed, closing the door behind them. This time, Juliet wasn't here seeking clues. She was here seeking truth. The intruder will return. They wanted revenge, not valuables. The moment the door closed, Miriam didn't waste time. Her voice lowered, but her tone was firmer than before. What I told you that day wasn't the full extent, Miriam began. I could only say so much in the hallway, but since you're here, I need you to hear everything. Juliet's heartbeat picked up. Miriam continued. Juliet, the person who came into your home wasn't looking for your belongings. They weren't after money. They weren't curious. They came with purpose. Juliet felt her throat tighten. Purpose? She whispered. Yes, Miriam confirmed. The fracture on Kingsley's arm, the timing, the signs, none of it suggested a simple confrontation. This was personal. Someone had resentment strong enough to walk into your home. Juliet swallowed hard. But why say he will return? How can you know that? Miriam leaned closer, her voice steady. Because people driven by resentment don't stop after a single attempt. They test boundaries. They push. They come back until they've satisfied whatever anger they're carrying. A chill through Juliet's body. They didn't take anything, Miriam emphasized. They left a note instead. That tells me everything I need to know." Juliet nodded slowly, dread settling deep inside her. This wasn't a burglary. It was a message. For the first time since this ordeal began, Juliet felt fear not as a thought, but as something real, something undeniable swelling at the base of her throat. She pressed a hand lightly against her chest as Miriam's words echoed in her mind. Resentment, purpose, a return. The combination wasn't just unsettling. It was dangerous. Juliet closed her eyes briefly, steadying her breath. Kingsley's decision to protect her suddenly held a sharper clarity. He wasn't hiding a mistake. He was shielding her from a threat that felt larger than either of them had understood. When she opened her eyes, Miriam watched her carefully. "Juliet," she said gently, "you're not powerless, but you need awareness and preparation." Juliet nodded again, but this time with resolve mixed into her fear. "My husband and I won't run," she said softly, "but we need to be ready." Miriam stepped closer and touched Juliet's arm lightly. "Then start by trusting your instincts. They've guided you this far." Juliet inhaled deeply, strength forming beneath the tremor in her chest. She wasn't just scared now. She was alert. She was determined. She was prepared to stand beside Kingsley, not behind him, and she would protect their home at any cost. Former employee contract disputes, misconduct blame. When Juliet returned home from the hospital, the house felt unusually still, the kind of stillness that settled into corners and wrapped itself around the air. Kingsley sat on the living room couch, his sling supported by a cushion, his posture tense but expectant. He knew where she had gone. He knew why. Juliet walked toward him slowly, her expression calm but layered with determination. She took a seat beside him, close enough for her knee to brush his, grounding them both. "Kingsley," she began softly, "we can't move forward unless you tell me everything. Not pieces, not parts, all of it." Kingsley looked down at his hands, flexing the fingers of his uninjured arm as if gathering strength. He didn't avoid her, but the weight of what he carried was visible in his eyes. He inhaled deeply. "It started 2 years ago," he said quietly, "long before we moved into this house." Juliet listened closely, her body still. "I hired someone who showed promise," Kingsley continued, "a man who seemed capable of climbing within the company. But over time, things changed." He paused, then explained. He began missing deadlines, ignoring protocols. His communication broke down. "I tried to coach him, tried to help him recover his footing, but he didn't want guidance. He wanted control." Juliet could almost see the strain of those past months reflected in Kingsley's expression. "Eventually," he said, "it escalated into a contract dispute. He accused the company of mistreatment. He claimed he wasn't being supported, but the truth was he had violated multiple agreements." Juliet remained silent, giving him space to continue. "He was warned more than once," Kingsley said, "but when misconduct began affecting clients, I had no choice. His termination was the only option. Kingsley's jaw tightened as he added, "He didn't take it well. He blamed me for everything that went wrong in his life afterward, every hardship, every setback. He said I was the reason he lost his identity, his stability, his future." A chill moved through Juliet. Not fear, but recognition. She now understood the rage behind the intruder's message. Silence settled between them for a moment. But it wasn't cold. Juliet looked at Kingsley with steady eyes, absorbing each piece of his confession with clarity. She wasn't shocked he had a complicated work history. Everyone carried stories that felt too heavy to revisit. What hurt her wasn't the content of his past. It was the burden he endured alone. She took his hand gently, intertwining her fingers with his. "You were trying to protect everything you built," she said softly. "And you were trying to protect us." Kingsley looked up, emotion tightening in his throat. "I didn't want you involved in something that should have ended years ago. I thought he was gone. I thought he'd moved on." Juliet shook her head lightly. "Kingsley, people don't fall apart because of one man letting them go. If he came back, it's because he refused to take responsibility for his choices. That's not on you." He blinked slowly, as if her words unraveled a guilt he'd held too long. Juliet squeezed his hand. "You didn't deserve to carry this alone." Her voice wasn't angry, wasn't disappointed. It was full of unwavering loyalty, the kind she had shown him since the first day she fell in love with him. She didn't question his decisions. She didn't accuse him. She didn't distance herself. She stayed right beside him, exactly where she had promised to be. Kingsley took a slow breath and turned toward her fully. For the first time since he confessed, he allowed the vulnerability in his expression to soften into something else, something warm, something grateful. "Juliet," he whispered, "I was terrified you'd look at me differently after I told you all of this." Juliet shook her head, her eyes gentle. "Why would I? You're human. You've made hard decisions. You've tried to do what's right. That doesn't make you weak or flawed. It makes you a man who carries responsibility." Kingsley exhaled, as if the weight in his chest loosened. She leaned closer, brushing her fingers along his jaw. "Our marriage isn't built on perfection," she said. "It's built on honesty, trust, and the courage to face difficult things together." Kingsley's eyes glistened slightly, not from sadness, but from relief. "Thank you," he murmured, voice rough, "for not walking away from this." Juliet offered a small, soft smile. "I don't walk away. Not from you. Not from us." He leaned his forehead gently against hers, their breaths mixing in a quiet moment that felt like a promise renewed. In the vulnerability of his confession, and in the unwavering steadiness of her response, something unspoken passed between them. A deeper connection, a stronger bond, a unity that fear couldn't break. Juliet placed her hand over his heart, feeling its steady beat beneath her palm. Whatever comes next, we face it side by side. Kingsley nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Side by side, their love, tested by fear, strengthened itself in truth. The house was quiet enough for sleep to settle comfortably, yet Juliet's rest was uneasy. She shifted beneath the sheets, eyes closed, trying to chase the calm she once found so easily beside Kingsley. But somewhere in the middle of the night, a sound, faint but distinct, threaded its way into her awareness. Her eyes opened instantly. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed. 2:31 a.m. Juliet drew a slow breath, listening carefully. No movement beside her. Kingsley slept peacefully, his breathing rhythmic and soft. The house around them, however, felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She sat up slowly, her senses sharpening. Something had brushed the edge of silence downstairs. Not loud, not crashing, but purposeful. Familiar in the way footsteps become familiar after you've heard them once before, even if you don't want to admit it. Juliet placed her feet on the floor quietly. The air was cool, the kind of cold that didn't belong, a cold that told her someone else might be awake. Her heart didn't race. It steadied itself, preparing her for whatever came next. She turned gently toward Kingsley and whispered, "Kingsley, wake up!" Kingsley stirred, his eyes opening with immediate alertness. One glance at Juliet was enough. He saw the tension in her posture, the seriousness in her gaze. "What's wrong?" he whispered. Juliet swallowed once before answering. "There's someone downstairs." Kingsley's eyes widened slightly, the memory of the last encounter resurfacing in an instant. He pushed himself upright, careful of his arm, and listened with Juliet. A faint shift echoed again. A soft but undeniable movement beneath them. This wasn't the house settling. This wasn't the wind. This wasn't imagination. Someone was in their home. Juliet reached for Kingsley's uninjured hand, not out of fear, but out of unity. The same unity she promised him earlier that day. Side by side, Kingsley squeezed her hand once, a silent confirmation that he understood. The time for silence had ended. The intruder had returned. They moved quietly toward the bedroom door, careful not to make unnecessary noise. Kingsley's steps were slower due to his injury, but Juliet matched his pace without pulling or rushing. They descended the staircase side by side, their movements synchronized by unspoken trust. With each step, Juliet listened for the intruder's movement. With each step, Kingsley tried to angle his body protectively near hers. Halfway down the stairs, the sound grew clearer. A soft shuffle, a deliberate shift, a presence. Juliet gripped the railing, steadying herself. Kingsley glanced at her, and in that moment, Juliet saw neither weakness nor fear in him, only determination. They reached The bottom step. The living room lights were off, but the faint glow from the kitchen window stretched into the hallway, outlining shadows on the floor. Juliet felt the tension stretch thin in the air, like a held breath waiting to snap. Together, they moved toward the sound. As they stepped into the living room, the shape of someone stood near the dining table. Not moving, not hiding, standing. Juliet froze, gripping Kingsley's hand more firmly. The figure was faint in the low light, tall enough to cast a visible outline, still enough to make the moment feel suspended. Kingsley stepped forward carefully, his voice low but steady. "Why are you here?" The figure didn't respond at first. Instead, they shifted slightly, turning their body just enough for the light to hit their shoulder. Juliet's breath caught, not in panic, but in recognition that this wasn't random. The weight in the room felt identical to the fear Kingsley described. This was the same presence from the early morning encounter, the same silent anger, the same unresolved intent. Juliet's pulse deepened, not quickened. She held her ground. The figure took a step forward, their outline becoming clearer, and with that step, something on their wrist glinted faintly in the dim light. Band, tag, something medical. Juliet's eyes sharpened as the figure moved into better view. The wrist came forward first, the faint glow of plastic catching the minimal light. A hospital wristband. Juliet's chest tightened with realization. She recognized that band instantly. The print, the style, the way it wrapped around the wrist. The intruder had been at Moneta Memorial Hospital. Recently, very recently, Kingsley saw it, too. His eyes widened, not in fear, but in shock. The connection clicked instantly. Kingsley's former employee wasn't just angry. He had been admitted. He had been inside the same building Miriam worked in. He had moved through halls Juliet herself stood in earlier that day. The figure didn't step closer. They didn't speak. They simply raised their wrist, letting the band's reflection speak louder than words. They were not only back, they had never been far. Juliet inhaled slowly, her hand tightening around Kingsley's. This time, they weren't facing fear alone. They were facing together. The night air pressed against the windows as Juliet and Kingsley stood frozen in the living room, staring at the silent intruder whose hospital wristband glowed faintly under the moonlight pouring in. For a stretched second, the figure didn't move. Neither did Juliet. Neither did Kingsley. Then the intruder stepped forward. The motion triggered the porch light through the glass pane of the front door, flooding the entryway with a soft burst of brightness. Juliet's breath stalled. Kingsley's hand tightened around hers. The face that came into focus was not wild, not twisted, not angry. It was familiar. It was someone Juliet had stood beside in the hospital hallway, someone who had pressed a note into her palm with shaking urgency, someone whose concern had set this entire journey in motion. The intruder Was Miriam? Juliet's lips parted as her mind struggled to make sense of what stood before her. Miriam? Juliet whispered, her voice thin with disbelief. The nurse stood still, her posture calm, but lined with exhaustion. Her hospital wristband wasn't old. It was fresh. It hadn't been removed at discharge. It looked as though she had walked out of the building without stopping at all. Kingsley's eyes widened, confusion blending with shock. Why are you here? Miriam didn't raise her hands. She didn't step back. She made no threatening movements. She simply existed in the truth of the moment, a truth neither Juliet nor Kingsley had prepared for. The woman who warned Juliet, the woman who examined Kingsley's injury, the woman who said the intruder would return. She was standing inside their home. Juliet felt her heartbeat deepen, steady, ready to absorb whatever came next. Juliet took a single step forward, her voice trembling slightly. Miriam, you were at our door, in our house. Why? Kingsley didn't speak. He was too stunned to find immediate words. The pieces of their fear rearranged themselves in his mind, creating new questions that tangled with the ones he already carried. Miriam looked at both of them with an expression that held no anger, no threat, only urgency, weariness, and something Juliet hadn't expected, sorrow. You weren't supposed to wake up yet, Miriam said softly. I needed to get to you before someone else did. Juliet exchanged a glance with Kingsley, a glance filled with confusion, fear, and a dawning understanding that whatever they believed until now, the truth was not complete. The ground beneath their reality shifted. They were shaken, not by danger, but by revelation. Miriam stepped fully into the light now, and Juliet could see that her wristband wasn't the only sign of distress. Her eyes were rimmed with fatigue, as if she hadn't slept since the day she handed Juliet the first note. Juliet's voice wavered between fear and confusion. Miriam, why are you here? You told me the intruder would return, but you never said it was you. Miriam lowered her gaze briefly. Because I wasn't the intruder in the way you're thinking. She lifted her face again, urgency returning to her tone. Juliet, the problem isn't that you checked the smartwatch. It isn't the camera logs or the voice file. Juliet felt her breath hitch. Then what is it? You didn't check far enough. The sentence struck Juliet harder than she expected. Kingsley straightened slightly, tension rippling through his body. What do you mean? Juliet asked softly, dread slowly tightening her chest. Miriam looked directly at her. Everything you found pointed to an incident happening at 2 a.m. But the truth behind that moment, what caused the fall? It wasn't captured on any device. No recording, no sensor, no file. Her voice lowered. You saw the aftermath, not the cause. Juliet blinked, stunned. The distinction felt like a crack opening beneath her feet. If you had checked deeper, Miriam continued, you would have realized something else was missing. Something that should have been there, but wasn't. Kingsley exhaled softly, the memory of that night flashing across his expression. Juliet swallowed hard, bracing herself. "What was missing?" she whispered. Miriam stepped closer. "The force!" Miriam reached into the pocket of her jacket, slow, careful, deliberate, and withdrew a small folded paper. It looked almost identical to the first one she had given Juliet in the hospital. Juliet stared at it, recognizing the shape, the weight, the same style of folding. "This isn't new," Miriam said gently. "It's something I kept because I didn't know if you were ready. But now, you need it." She extended her hand. Juliet hesitated only a breath before taking the note. The paper felt warm from Miriam's touch, yet heavier than its size should allow. "You trusted me once," Miriam whispered. "Trust me again?" Juliet nodded slowly, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the paper. Kingsley took a small step closer, staying beside her, but letting her open it alone. The note had only one line, written in the same firm handwriting Juliet remembered from the first secret message. She lifted it to the light. Her heart stalled. "He didn't fall by accident." The words were clear, direct, impossible to misinterpret. He didn't fall by accident. Juliet's breath left her in a quiet gasp. She closed her eyes for a moment, fighting the surge of emotion rising from her chest. Disbelief, fear, horror, and a deep ache she couldn't name. She opened her eyes again. "Miriam," she whispered, "what does this mean?" Kingsley looked at Miriam with confusion and dawning realization. His voice was barely audible. "I told you. I slipped." Miriam shook her head gently. "No, Kingsley, you didn't." Juliet pressed the note to her heart, her hands shaking. The truth she had been searching for since the hospital. The truth Miriam had been trying to guide her toward. It wasn't about a fall. It wasn't about timing. It wasn't about secrecy. It was about intent. Miriam's shoulders dropped slightly, and for a moment she looked nothing like the intruder they imagined. She looked wounded, burdened, as though carrying the truth had cost her something. "Juliet," she said softly, "I didn't come here to frighten you. I didn't break into your home to cause harm. I came because you weren't seeing the full picture. You were close, but not close enough." Tears filled Juliet's eyes, not from fear, but from the pressure of everything finally converging. The late-night fall, the broken cameras, the unfinished draft message, the cryptic notes. Kingsley stared at Miriam, his voice unsteady. "If I didn't fall, then what happened to me?" Miriam's expression tightened, sorrow deepening in her eyes. "That's what I'm to finish telling you," she said. "I've been trying to protect you both in the only way I could, by warning Juliet before it was too late." Juliet wiped her cheek, her breath unsteady. "Why us? Why warn me?" Miriam looked at her with eyes full of empathy, not threat. "Because the real danger isn't behind you," she whispered. It's still ahead. And the weight of that truth settled like a final stone in Juliet's chest. Someone pushed him. Juliet's fingers tightened around the note as she looked at Mariam, searching her face for any hint of mischief or deception. But Mariam's expression held nothing but a quiet, painful truth she'd been carrying alone. Mariam stepped closer, lowering her voice into a whisper, not out of fear, but out of respect for the gravity of what she was about to say. Juliet, Kingsley didn't slip. He didn't fall by accident. Juliet's breath caught, a tremble coursing through her spine as Mariam leaned in slightly, her eyes locked on Juliet's. Someone pushed him. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed with the force of a blow, heavy enough to silence every sound in the room. Kingsley froze. Juliet's grip on the note weakened. The truth cleared the air like a sharp blade. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't clumsiness. This wasn't fear of falling. It was an attack. Juliet's knees weakened, and she took a step backward, unable to steady the whirlwind ripping through her chest. Her mind reached for air, for logic, for anything that made sense. But the pieces didn't align. Pushed, she whispered, barely forming the word. Her hands trembled so fiercely the note crinkled against her skin. She looked at Kingsley, the man she loved, the man she thought she knew every detail of, and saw not weakness on his face, but devastation. If someone pushed him, if someone was inside their home, if someone wanted revenge, then everything they believed until now had been the surface, not the truth. Juliet pressed her free hand to her mouth, fighting the rising panic. Each realization hit harder than the last. Who did this? When did they get close enough? How long had they been watching? Mariam didn't move forward. She allowed Juliet space to absorb the truth. But shock rippled through Juliet so deeply that her breath stilled in her chest. Everything was different now. Everything. Kingsley's eyes widened slowly, the truth sinking into him with a heaviness he couldn't hide. He pressed his good hand against the armrest, steadying himself as Mariam's words drew him back to the night he fell. He replayed it. Not the slip, not the landing, but the second before. The shape behind him, the pressure on his shoulder. The shove, he assumed, came from his own misstep. Kingsley swallowed hard. I thought I lost my balance, he said softly. I didn't think. You didn't lose your balance, Mariam said with quiet certainty. Someone made sure you fell. Kingsley's expression shifted, confusion sharpening into realization, realization darkening into fear. This wasn't about revenge alone, he murmured. It's more than anger. This is targeted. Juliet looked at him through teary eyes, her heart twisting. Who, Lee? He meant to hurt you? Kingsley nodded slowly, the truth tightening around him like a vice. And if he came back tonight, then he isn't finished. Mariam closed her eyes for a moment, pain etched in her features. "That's why I came back. Not to frighten you, but to keep you ahead of what's coming." The room fell silent. Not empty, not calm, tense, like air before a storm breaks. Juliet stood perfectly still, the truth pulling the ground out from beneath her piece by piece. Her breath trembled, not loud, not frantic, but deep enough to shake her soul. Mariam stepped back slowly. Kingsley reached for Juliet's hand, grounding her even as fear flickered across his own features. Sleep would not return tonight. Comfort would not return easily. Normal was gone. Juliet closed her eyes for a brief moment, a single tear slipping down her cheek as she inhaled unsteadily. The truth had arrived, and it had changed everything. A breath that marked the end of what they thought they knew, and the beginning of what they now had to face.